It is my great pleasure to introduce our kickoff keynote speaker for the morning, Fairtrade USA founder and CEO Paul Rice. Paul started Fairtrade USA 20 years ago, if I can give an age for him. It was then Transfair USA back in 1998, shortly after returning from 11 years spent organizing farmers in Nicaragua. He was on the ground, he came back, he was energized, and he wanted to do something about it here. Since then, he has really made a mark, made some waves in this movement. He's made a name for himself, been honored by Ashoka, by Fast Company Magazine's Social Capitalist of the Year award several times, as well as the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. A lot has grown in the movement in that time. He's led a lot of change within Fairtrade. And this past fall, Fairtrade USA celebrated its 20th anniversary, right? So not only has the organization grown, but fair trade has grown as a movement. The landscape looks very different than it did 2 decades ago. And I know that I'm inspired to see Paul continuing to push for that innovation, push for that growth, keep moving fair trade forward, and do more and more to expand fair trade to support the farmers, the workers, now the fishers around the world, who are all here to support with the fair trade commitments that we're making. So Paul will speak more today to the work that he's done for that movement. He'll speak more to this vision for where we go next, where the next 5, 10, 20 years going to take us with fair trade. Please join me in welcoming Paul Rice to the stage.
We are a diverse group of stakeholders. We come from completely different corners of this movement, businesses and consumers and activists and NGOs and producers. And yet we are all here bound by this common vision that business business must be a force for good in the world. That consumers, that you and I, ordinary people, that we can be a force for good in the world with the things that we buy, with our everyday choices. That farmers and workers are not the passive beneficiaries of our charity. They are a force for good in the world. They are finding their voice. They are our partners in a common quest to save the planet. And I celebrate that. I celebrate that here we are a microcosm of our incredibly vibrant, diverse movement. And I'm so happy to be here this morning. So I want to drink some water. Because believe it or not, as much as I do this, I still get nervous. I want to talk a little bit today about my trip to Rwanda 2 weeks ago and the last 30-year journey that got me there. So I was really angry in college. I was angry at injustice. I was angry at poverty. I was angry at this whole crazy reality that we live in where there's unprecedented wealth around the world, and yet there's hunger and homelessness and exploitation and climate degradation, and those two just didn't make sense in my head. And so as a student, I decided I was going to go work with farmers. My grandfather was a farmer. He lost his farm during the Great Depression in Oklahoma. And I grew up hearing those stories, and I felt an affinity to farmers and how hard it is to make a living as a farmer. So straight out of college at the tender age of 22, I bought a one-way ticket to Nicaragua, and I went off to work with farmers in Nicaragua. And I thought I'd stay for a year, and I ended up staying for 11 years. I was 22 when I went away. I was 33 when I came home. Yo soy Pablo. And I spent that decade working in the mountains with farmers, organizing co-ops. and helping to implement very well-intentioned international aid-funded projects. And over the years, I grew really disillusioned with that model, with that top-down, aid-driven approach to solving the problems of poverty and environmental destruction. It didn't work. It didn't feel like we were making any progress. And then really, kind of quite by accident, about halfway through my time there, I heard about these crazy people in Boston and in Europe, and they called themselves fair traders. And their philosophy was trade, not aid. Trade, not aid. This notion that farmers don't need our aid, they don't need our charity, artisans don't need our aid, they just need a fair price for all their hard work, and that if we as consumers can give them that, they will architect their own futures and chart their own course of sustainable development. And I was captivated by this notion, and so in the summer of 1990, I organized Nicaragua's very first fair trade co-op with 20 brave souls who signed up for this crazy idea that they could not only be farmers, but also that they could export their own harvest straight to the global market. And it worked. And over the next 4 years, as head of the co-op, I helped organize 3,000 families all over northern Nicaragua who came together to process and export their coffee. And it was amazing because it worked. We got so much more money than what local middlemen were paying. And that allowed us to do extraordinary things in our communities, like keeping kids in school and launching health programs and digging wells to bring clean water into our communities for the first time. We launched women's empowerment programs, providing microloans to women entrepreneurs so that they could develop their own economic independence. We reforested areas that had been clear-cut years before. We built infrastructure to improve the quality and the productivity. We did training. We did so many amazing things in our communities. There was so much economic and social and environmental progress. And none of it thanks to the goodwill of some government agency or some international NGO. It was all just based on this really simple idea of a fair price for a great product. So up until that point, I was an anti-capitalist. I thought companies were the problem. I thought markets were the problem. I thought capitalism was evil. And through this journey with Prodecop, through this journey with fair trade, what I discovered was, yeah, capitalism has a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong. But markets can also be an incredibly powerful force for lifting the poor out of poverty. Markets can be an incredibly powerful force for helping small farmers in the highlands of countries around the world to go from being victims of globalization to being effective, competitive, empowered actors in the global economy. And that inspired me, and it changed my way of thinking. And after 11 years in the field, I felt like I needed to come back and do this and join you. Fair trade was big in Europe, and we didn't have much going on in the US. A few brave companies that were pioneering the idea, but no one was scaling it. So that's what brought me here. That's what brought me to start Fair Trade USA 20 years ago. And I just want to share with you a couple of numbers that we together as a movement have accomplished through Fair Trade USA and through the Fair Trade movement. And actually, why Fair Trade USA? Two reasons why I wanted to start this organization. One, because I had seen fair trade work in the field. And two, because I believed in the value of certification. I believed that certification was a way to scale the movement, was a way to engage companies, not just mission-driven companies, but also companies that wanted to test the waters and see if fair trade products would sell. And so certification and labeling was a way to test that hypothesis that fair trade could go mainstream, that it could affect a much larger group of farmers and workers around the world. So Fair Trade USA is 20 years old, and to date we've signed about 1,300 brands and retailers to join our cause. Yeah. And some of those companies are in the room. And it's really exciting to see their numbers grow every year. Those 1,300 companies are selling roughly 40 different product categories. So we started with coffee, and then tea and chocolate and sugar and eventually fresh fruits and vegetables. And along the way, we heard the apparel industry say, is that cool thing that you developed for agriculture applicable to the world of apparel? And so we developed a fair trade apparel standard addressing the conditions of factory workers, of wages and worker safety and health in factories around the world. And then the fishing sector came to us and said, well, can we apply it to fisheries? And so we developed a standard for fisheries. And then the farm worker movement here in the United States and the retail community said to us, well, that's cool that you're doing fair trade overseas, but can we bring it home? What about farm workers in California, in Texas, in Arizona? Don't they deserve the benefits of fair trade too? And we said yes. And Wholesome Tomatoes was the very first one. Is Wholesome in the house? Raise your hand, please, if you are. Yes. Very first fair trade certified farm in the United States, and that effort is growing. We now have 60% consumer awareness of the fair trade certified label. 60% of American adults, when shown that label, say, oh yeah, I've seen that. That's about 120 million people, y'all. So roughly 20% of American adults, that's 40 million people, say they're buying fair trade certified products on a regular basis. 40 million people, that's our cohort, that's our tribe, that's our army. And it's growing. It's growing every day. In no small part, thanks to you, thanks to those of us who are out there spreading the word. We measure our impact in many ways. First of all, just by getting a farm or a factory into compliance with fair trade standards, because that means the right to organize, it means the right to a better wage, it means better workplace safety, it means better environmental stewardship. So just being covered by the fair trade standard is huge impact. But then, as you all know, there's a premium. So the companies that do fair trade agree to pay a little bit more money back to those farms or back to those factories. And that extra money, that community development premium, is what enables communities to invest in water and health and education and productivity and so many other things. So that premium is something that at Fair Trade USA, as an auditor, as a certifier, we track that every year. And I'm so proud to report that last year, 2018, was a record year. Here in the United States, we generated just over $100 million in fair trade premiums and pricing. $100 million. That's what we did together. So I'm so excited about where we are, and I'm even more excited about where we're going. I would say over the last 20 years, there have been so many lessons, and I'll share three. The first one is that this crazy idea of responsible business or of conscious capitalism, this thing that 20 years ago, companies said, no way. Sustainability and profitability, those don't go together. It's one or the other, but it's not both. That mentality has given way to an emerging realization in the business community that sustainability, in fact, drives profitability, that sustainability can drive profitability, that those two go together, that it's not one or the other, it's both. The business community is realizing this. There's a well-known professor at Harvard University named Michael Porter, and Michael Porter came up with a theory called shared value. Look him up. Check it out. Shared value. And shared value is this notion that we don't have to ask companies to take a reduction in their profits in order to help farmers and workers in their supply chain. That's not our ask. This is not about redistribution of wealth. Lord knows we need redistribution of wealth. That's not what our model does. Our model says fair trade creates new value that is shared by farmers and workers and the ecosystem and companies and consumers. We're creating new value. For farmers and workers, it's a better wage, it's a better price, it's access to the market. For companies, it's a way to make their supply chains more secure, more stable, more reliable. It's a way for them to differentiate their brand and tell a story. For consumers, for us, why do we buy fair trade products? Because they're great quality, because they make us feel good, because they're consistent with our values. And more people like us are making that values-based choice when they buy things. So there's shared value. And fair trade isn't the only model of shared value, obviously. But I think we're actually one of the most potent examples of shared value and one of the best examples of why conscious capitalism is going from being the crazy idea of a few to the emerging normal. And it's going to take 20, 30, 50 years. It's on y'all to make this happen. But I feel very confident in the long-term trajectory of our movement of responsible business. That's one lesson. Second lesson, innovation. We have to be innovative. Businesses talk about this all the time. Social movements don't always talk about innovation, and yet, as a social movement, we too have to be creative and courageous. We have to have the courage to challenge our own beliefs, to challenge our own assumptions, to test new ideas. You know, the origins of fair trade in the 1940s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, that long, great history of fair trade, it really thought of fair trade as something that linked mission-driven companies with small farmer co-ops and small artisan co-ops. And that was a wonderful idea. But we have evolved that notion. We now include farm workers on larger farms. We include workers in factories. We work with fishermen. And we don't just work with the small mission-driven companies. We love them. They share our values. But we also believe that we have to work with the bigger companies. I mean, how cool is it that you can now get fair trade blue jeans at Madewell? Right? And fair trade rugs at Target. You don't have to clap for all of these. It's fine, right? I mean, yesterday we heard from Kroger. Kroger, mainstream retail, is realizing we, the people, we, the consumer, we want sustainable products. That's an innovation of our model. 50 years ago, we never imagined that mainstream capitalists would say, oh, shared value, conscious consumerism, fair trade, yeah, we can do that in our business and help the world and make money at the same time. That wasn't part of the original mentality, and here we are today. We've had the courage to innovate our model and evolve it, and we're still evolving. And my invitation to you as leaders in this movement is be creative in how you think about the future of our movement, because the future isn't in my hands, it's in yours. The third lesson, I would say, the third lesson I want to share from 20 years is at Fair Trade USA. You know, at the end of the day, it's all about the consumer, y'all. I mean, the farmers can work so hard to produce the best quality and deliver on time. They do their part. And businesses, they can make the leap of faith and put fair trade products out there. And it's not always a leap of faith, but I'm saying, like, they can make that happen. They can source that product. They can put it out there on the shelf. But if it stays on the shelf, we're done. No impact. It's got to move off the shelf. Someone has to buy it. If it sells, we win. And if it doesn't sell, we lose. It's that simple. Consumers have to join our cause. And, I've always thought of consumers as a sleeping giant, right? So powerful, but, asleep. So let's wake them up. Let's wake them up, right? Because what we found is, at a time like today, when so many of us are so completely disillusioned with the political process, when we have a government that is so messed up, so wrong. I mean, a lot of us are leaning into political activism, and we should, but there's a lot of people out there who just feel like their voice and their vote don't matter. And yet we all eat. So what better way? We all wear clothes. What better way through our food and our clothing to reach consumers with this powerful message that you too can make a difference with something as simple as a cup of tea or a banana or a bar of chocolate or a shirt. That's incredibly powerful stuff, to realize that we can make a difference every day. We also need to change this government. Don't get me wrong. Let's do that too. All right? Let's do that too. Someone's going to scold me. I don't care. Let's waken the sleeping giant. That's the third lesson from this journey, that at the end of the day, the public has the power. The consumer has the power. So, let me talk about Rwanda for a minute. Wow, what a country. What an amazing country. I went there with a group of folks from Kroger. And Carrie, are you still in the house? Carrie from Kroger, somewhere, anywhere? Is anyone from Kroger in the house? Okay, well, they were here yesterday. I hope they're around. Because Kroger, who knew, right? Kroger is actually really leaning in with fair trade. And they're offering more and more products every quarter. And we went with a team from Kroger to look at the impact that they're having with the tea that they're sourcing from the highlands of Rwanda. And after visiting the tea farms and after the Kroger team left, I stayed behind and just took some time for me to go back up into the hills to visit coffee farmers and kind of reconnect with my own roots working with coffee farmers. We had run a project in Rwanda 15 years ago, helping Rwandan farmers improve quality and organize strong co-ops, and I wanted to visit with some of the farmers that had been in that program and see if it made a difference. So I spent a few days riding around the hills and visiting with coffee farmers, and I want to tell you about one of those farmers that I hung out with for a while. His name is Jean-Marie Bikamumakuba. Hang on. No, Bikamamakuba. Jean-Marie Bikamamakuba. And maybe we have a picture of him, of Jean-Marie. There he is. Oh. So Jean-Marie is like, for me, in many ways, he's so typical of the kinds of people that we all work with, right? He's a typical Rwandan coffee farmer. What that means is he has 1 acre of coffee. He's a very small farm. He and his wife Dorothy have 1 acre of coffee. They have 1 acre of food crops, corn and beans, and cassava and potatoes. They grow their own food. And this is typical of Peru. It's typical of Colombia, of so many countries where we work, where farmers don't just grow coffee for the market. They also know that food security starts there. They have to grow their own food, and they do. And Jean-Marie studied through 3rd grade, and that was very typical of his generation. He left school after 3rd grade not because he didn't want to study, but because his family was too poor to keep him in school. And the norm there traditionally was that coffee farmers would sell their raw cherries at the time of harvest to the local middlemen who would come up to their community and pay pennies per pound for their coffee. That's the norm in so many of these countries, delivering raw agricultural commodities that have no value add. There was no electricity in their communities, no internet, no way to know international market price, and therefore they were negotiating blind. The middlemen dictated price. Here's today's price, take it or leave it. And that's the sad reality for so many farmers around the world to this day. And that was his reality. But Jean-Marie and Dorothy and their neighbors organized a cooperative in 2004, 15 years ago. And they knew, first and foremost, that the only way to prosper was to stop selling their raw coffee cherries to the middlemen. And so they formed a co-op, and they started to market their harvest direct. They raised money from alternative lenders like Root Capital and built infrastructure to process their own coffee. So they weren't selling raw coffee cherries, they were processing it and adding value, and then through a local exporter, a friendly exporter, going direct to the international market and getting so much more money. And they got fair trade certified that very first year, so they started to get fair trade premiums, and things started to change. They started to get so much more income coming back into their community. And so I asked him, well, what did this mean for you, for your family? He said, for my family, it meant I was able to keep my kids in school. All 6 kids finished high school. All 6 kids finished high school. In the highlands of Rwanda, that's a remarkable accomplishment. It's an accomplishment because high school is free, but you're not allowed to go to high school if you don't have shoes on your feet. You're not allowed to go to high school if you don't have a uniform. School is free, but shoes are not free. So they were making enough money for their coffee to buy shoes for their kids. It's that simple. That's the impact that we make, because when you have shoes on your feet, you can stay in school. I asked him, what else? What else? Tell me more. What other changes? He took me to see his cow. If you check out my Instagram feed, you'll see his cow. He's very proud of his cow. It's a cute cow. It gives them about 8 liters of milk a day. They eat yogurt, they eat cheese. It's made a big difference in their nutrition, in the nutrition of their family. I said, well, okay, tell me about the community. I know fair trade is, I get it, fair trade has improved your life, your family's life, but what about the community? And he said the two are connected. It's not like the community and the family are separate. They're one and the same, because one of the first things we did was we decided as a group, as a community, to buy health insurance for every family in the cooperative. And here we're struggling with this issue in the U.S., in the wealthiest nation in the world. In Rwanda, in that co-op, every family is covered by health insurance. How cool is that? They invested in water. Water was a big problem in those communities. And, you know, statistically, if you look at it, the number one cause of death of children under the age of 5 in many, many, many developing countries is gastrointestinal diseases caused by drinking dirty water. They knew if they cleaned up the water, they could improve health for children, for adults, for everyone. And so they dug wells, and those wells provide water not just to the members of the co-op, but to everyone in the community. So the ripple effect of fair trade, of including not just those who have joined, but those around them. They invested in training, because what they heard their fair trade buyers tell them early on is, if you grow quality, we'll pay you more. Right? Fair trade isn't charity. We're not going to pay you a higher price just because we like you. You need to produce quality, and if you do, you will be rewarded. And so they invested in training, in technical assistance, figuring out, okay, how do we pick the best coffee beans? How do we process those coffee beans in a way that the market will pay us more? And they figured it out. Today, and you'll hear more about this later, coffee prices have plummeted in the international market. Coffee prices at around 95, 98 cents a pound. Farmers typically get half that. So the international commodity price is what, is a reference point in the global market. Farmers typically make today around 50 cents a pound. Cost of production is around $1.40 a pound. That's where we've set the fair trade minimum price. That means farmers are way underwater. They can't even cover their cost of production. Jean-Marie and Dorothy and their co-op today is making almost $3 a pound for their coffee, thanks to these investments in training and infrastructure and quality. So that's an important part of our fair trade story. It's not just the premium, it's what the premium enables in terms of the economic development and the ability of farmers to harness their entrepreneurial energy and become really successful business people in the global economy. That's what they did. So I told Jean-Marie, I've got this speech coming up. What should I say? Seriously, I told him I had this speech coming up, and what should I say? What do you want me to say? What do you want me to say to people in the United States? And I wrote it down so I wouldn't get it wrong. Here's his message. He says, I am happy and proud to make good coffee for you. I hope to meet you one day. Please come to Rwanda to visit me. You are welcome. Please pay a few cents more for our coffee. It makes a difference. And please tell others to join our fair trade movement. Please tell others to join our fair trade movement. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Can we give it up for my buddy, Jean-Marie? Okay, I'm going to finish up. And I've been told that we have a couple of minutes for questions, so get ready. If you have questions for me, I'm all in. Hang on. Here's my parting thought. And we have people with mics, so we need to, so when you raise your hand, we'll get you a mic. Here's my parting thought. It's a call to action. It's a call to action. Why do we come to gatherings like this? And what's the point? The point is, we come here to connect with our community. We come here to evolve our thinking. We come here to develop tools. We come here to get inspired so that we can go out and act, so that we can go out and change the world. And here's the thing, that comment I made about the sleeping giant, they're out there. Our friends, our family, our classmates, our colleagues at work, they're out there. And they're hungry, just like we are. They're hungry to figure out how they can make a difference too. And we have one way to make a difference. And so you all are the vanguard of that effort. You're the spark. You're the spark that's going to light it up. You have so much opportunity to go back and talk about what you've learned and talk about what has inspired you in our movement and get others involved and bring them along. And when we recruit others to our cause, it's not like we're asking them for a favor. It's actually an invitation to join a cause, to join a community, to join our tribe, to join us in this incredibly powerful movement that's going to take a long time. Long after I'm gone, y'all will be carrying the torch, and those who come after you will carry the torch. Don't lose the faith. You make a difference. Thank you. Thank you for everything you do. Okay, bring it. Bring it, bring it. We probably have time for 3 quick questions. Who has microphones? Microfono. Here we go, up front. Microphone up front. Juliet, what's your question?
Hi. So my question is, how does a fair trade organization work with a B Corp movement? Because there is a lot of talk, lots of companies also becoming B Corp. So I'm just wondering if you guys are teaming up together. Or?
Great question. They're kindred spirits. We love those guys. We don't really do much with them directly, but we're finding that more and more companies that do fair trade are also signing up for B Corp. And if you all don't know about B Corp, check them out because they're cool.
Hi, I'm Steve Watrous from Milwaukee. Probably done a great job on keeping leadership on this movement, despite sometimes turbulent waters of the fair trade movement. For example, you brought around some speakers a while back from Colombia about fair trade bananas. We took them over to Whole Foods, which is one of their buyers. Whole Foods doesn't do all that much with certification through you all. They have their own direct relationship. And just around Wisconsin, we have coffee, fair trade coffee, people with a fair trade story anyway, and chocolate that don't go through Fair Trade USA or any other certifier. Well, what should be our approach toward them?
So, at Fair Trade USA, we often talk about the big tent strategy. And when we think about the big tent, it's, who is the broader movement for social justice and change and bringing business into that movement and having the business community join us in this quest for a better world. And so under that big tent are all kinds of organizations, fair trade organizations and other certifiers. And I think we're all pulling in the same direction. We have different strategies, we have different labels, we have maybe different takes on different issues, but at the end of the day, we're all working for the same thing. We're all working for better lives and for sustaining the environment and for holding the business community accountable and actually bringing them in as partners, right? And helping to harness that power. So, I would say support every fair trade label out there. And, company-inspired programs are a good step in the right direction. Let's ask them to do more. Let's ask them to do more. It's great when a company comes out and does their own thing and says, here's our sustainability approach. But I do think there's value in independent third-party auditing and certification. That's how we know that they're actually walking the talk. So let's encourage them in what they're doing and ask them to do more. And by the way, Whole Foods, that label that they have, Whole Trade Guarantee, that's backed up by a certification. And Fair Trade USA does a lot of the certification behind that. They also have Rainforest Alliance and Equitable Food Initiative and some other certifiers. So actually the Whole Trade Guarantee isn't bogus, it's actually substantiated. But I hear your point, which is a lot of companies are doing their own thing. And I think that's a good step in the right direction, and we should encourage them to keep going on the journey. Thanks for that great question.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this inspiration and this whole weekend. I work for an NGO in Tanzania, and we're doing our best to work ourselves out of a job there. So we're working on our fair trade certification, and I just wondered if you had advice on starting a collective in a developing nation, and then also any resources you could point us to here in the United States to connect the stories and the products that they're coming up with there to the wider market here. Thank you.
So my advice, having started something in Nicaragua. My advice is if you want to start something in Tanzania, find local Tanzanian leaders to help you do that and really tap into the local knowledge and wisdom that they have. Nicaragua, that's what I did. I mean, I'd been there for a while, but I was still a transplant, so I looked for farmer leaders who had a shared vision and kind of the courage to think big. And I'm sure that in Tanzania, I mean, actually, we work in Tanzania, so you have so many leaders in Tanzania who have been from the time of Ujamaa and the 60s and 70s. There's a strong tradition there of collective agriculture. So I'm sure there are leaders there. We work with some of them. The coffee farmers on the slopes of Kilimanjaro have been farming cooperatively for many years. So my team is here. There are also a lot of people in the room who have deep experience organizing farmers and artisans and others. So I would encourage you to circulate and connect with them because you're not alone. And thank you for what you're doing. I think we have, there's one and there's one. Go ahead.
Hi.
And then we have one more up here. And I'm afraid that'll be our last three.
Cool. So you mentioned that sustainability equals profit. I'm wondering how we ensure that large corporations don't use the term fair trade as a catchy phrase for profit, and how to maintain transparency, and how consumers, if they do have the power, how we ensure that large corporations don't take advantage of the profitability.
Yeah, good question. I know, right? It's hard not to be skeptical about businesses and their intentions. I know there's a lot of skepticism because, big business historically hasn't done so well on issues like wages and social justice and environment. So, with good reason, we're skeptical. But here's the thing. There are a lot of people in the business world now that are just like you. They have big hearts and they care. And for whatever reason, they found themselves in business. Carrie yesterday from Kroger, she said she used to call herself brand manager, and now she calls herself brand activist. There's so many people in the business world that don't want to have to check their values at the door when they come to work every day. They want to bring their values to work. They want to do the right thing. So I think our skepticism is healthy. We need to hold companies accountable for what they promise to do. We at Fairtrade USA actually are very careful in what we allow companies to say about their fair trade offerings. So part of our agreement with companies when we work with them is that we get to approve their communications around their fair trade launches before it goes public. So that they can't sign up for 2% of their total volume fair trade and then position themselves as, oh, hey, y'all, we're a fair trade company. So we have some control over that by contract. But the bigger question is, how do we all kind of discourage scammers and posers and encourage those who are going deep? And, I think as consumers, we, and as activists, we have the ability to, you would be so surprised at the impact that a letter to a manager has. You'd be so surprised. They actually read that stuff. They take it seriously when they get feedback from their customers. So we have the ability to encourage companies to do more and to throttle back if we think they're, posing or presenting themselves in a way that isn't accurate. And remember, this notion that sustainability can be profitable, we want that, right? We want that. Because if companies do fair trade out of enlightened self-interest, then, that's our dream, right? That fair trade will become, and things like it, will become the norm in the future rather than the exception. So that's, when I talk about innovation, that's really what I'm looking for, is how do we make sure that companies actually see it in their own interest, not out of greed, but yes, out of self-interest. Yeah, we want them to feel like, okay, this is going to be good for my business. This is a smart decision. I'm not going to have to go up against Wall Street and explain why I'm taking lower profits. Fair trade is not going to hurt that. In fact, it's going to make me more successful. I mean, look at Patagonia. Sorry, I'm riffing, and I know we got 2 more questions here. Oh, yes, I've been given 2 more minutes. So Patagonia, billion-dollar company, super well known for being sustainable and righteous, and before they did fair trade, right? They were well known and well respected for being a responsible company. And we went and pitched them on doing fair trade, and we said, look, you guys are well known for being responsible. The movement needs you. We think this is going to be good for your business. Most of your activism and your focus in the past has been on the environment. Let's bring the workers into that. And they said yes. And so Patagonia signed up just 4 years ago, and in 4 years, they're now up to almost 70% of their total business, so we're talking about $700 million plus, of their total business has now been converted to fair trade, and they're well on their way to going all the way. They're not doing it. Yeah, let's give it up for them. What a great example. They're not doing it at the expense of their financial success. Fair trade is enabling their financial success. It's enabling them to succeed as a business, holistically speaking. So I look to them as kind of an example. Okay, this is like best in class. Let's see if we can get others to emulate.
Hi, I just have a question kind of concerning the opposite of what she said. I'm from a small town in Iowa, so when I go home, I'm often called young, idealistic. They're like, oh, do you need your fair trade, vegan, organic? I get a lot of crap for it. So is there a way to reverse that stigma so that people are like, oh, I don't want fair trade. I don't need that hippie stuff, to like make it more appealing? Because we need to reach across the aisle, because we need those people to be on our side so that we can be more sustainable. So I guess what would be your advice on changing that stigma so I'm just not that hippie vegan girl in my small town in Iowa? Thank you.
Let's give it up for Iowa. Actually, I think it's pretty cool to be young and idealistic. It's interesting because we heard some data yesterday, some consumer research and insights, which indicated that fair trade actually resonates deeply with people who identify themselves as Republicans. And I found that really interesting, but also intuitively it makes sense to me, because what we do is at its highest level not political. It's about values. It's not political. It's about values. It's about this value that we learned on the playground in kindergarten, right? Fair. What's fair? Be fair. Be fair. That's not fair. Be fair. We learned that. It's in our DNA. Be fair. We're not always fair. But I think as a culture, as a society, we have this deep connection to a sense of fairness. I think there's a strong connection in this country to the notion that if you work hard, you should have opportunities to advance. You should get a decent wage. You should be able to provide for yourself and your family. I think that resonates. Those concepts don't feel political to me, explicitly political. They feel deeply ingrained in our culture and in what is best about our culture. Because there's this other discourse going on now. But I actually believe that fair trade resonates. And so I guess my answer to your question is, when you're talking with folks who might want to caricature you as that hippie girl, remind them of their values. Remind them of who they are. Remind them of what they hold dear in their own human relationships, because that is fair trade.